Imagine if you went from feeling fine every day to feeling amazing. How would your life be different? Everyone has the ability to feel amazing again and again. You just need the right tools to get there. If you're ready to feel amazing, stick around. Now, here's the host of the I'm Not Fine show with functional nutrition coach Lizzie Enns.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to have a phenomenal episode. I'm so excited to have my dear friend DJ on here, and we're going to have just a fun, phenomenal, amazing, and inspiring conversation here because let me tell you something. This guy has like mental resilience that not many people do at his age. Let me just tell you, I met DJ in a mastermind last year. And it's just been fun to like get to know you, DJ, and what you're doing with your business and how you're helping people. Obviously, we have a lot of things in common in terms of fitness, and we both geek out over all of that stuff. But what you did is you took fitness and turned it into more than just about the body. You turn it into the mind and the resilience and how do we build mental resilience. So DJ, welcome to the show. I'm so excited for this conversation. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Wow, what an intro. That was phenomenal, Lizzie. Thank you so much for that. I truly appreciate the opportunity to be on the show today. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Rochester, New York, and I live now in Tampa, Florida. I needed a little bit of sun in my life. And I kind of got into this whole world of mental resilience or mental fitness, however you really want to kind of define it, almost on accident. I had graduated college in Rochester, New York, and was struggling with some stuff mentally, and I didn't know exactly how to fix it. And it was tough because I had great support systems around me, right? Great family, great friends, so much to be grateful for, yet I didn't feel good mentally and internally, felt lost, felt misguided. And so after a couple months of kind of floating around, I was using social media as a big coping strategy and some other unhealthy habits. And I ended up reaching out to a mentor of mine, and we met, and I was like, hey, I need help. And I don't know exactly what I actually need help with. But I don't feel that good, like on a daily basis, and I'm stressed and I'm anxious, and I don't know exactly why. And we basically, for the next 3 years, trained our minds in the similar fashion that you would like train a physical muscle, right? And if you think about like physical fitness and growing a muscle, you're applying stress or pressure to it for a duration of time, and then you let it rest. And then over time, it gets stronger and it can lift more physical weight. It can move faster, right? It can twitch faster. And so we were doing the same thing, but for our thinking, right? We'd apply pressure
Wow.
and stress to our thinking for these sessions, and then we'd rest for a couple of days, and then we'd go back and we'd do it again. And over time, my thinking essentially got stronger. Like I could handle more stress. I could do harder things. And I was like, this is kind of like training your mind like a muscle. This is basically mental fitness. And that's kind of how I personally kind of got into this whole world. And then I said, hey, I wonder if other people would like this idea of mental fitness. And that's kind of how we started to get into working with businesses and teams and organizations. And I work with young men in their 18 to 30, because I know, there's a lot of young men out there very similar to who I was, when I was in my early 20s, who are struggling with finding that path and finding their purpose. And so we utilize mental fitness to help all of these different types of people basically do hard things better.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Do hard things better. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I'm really curious because most people run away from hard things, like to like put themselves intentionally in hard, difficult places. What did you guys do? Like, what did you put yourself through to be like, because we can go to the gym and be like, oh, I'm gonna do like some squats and
Mhm.
all that stuff, and like we break down the muscles. That's hard work,
Yeah.
right? But what did you do to on purpose put yourself in a mental difficult place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually never had anybody ask the specific things that we did. But what we basically did was we kind of addressed fear in a very authentic way. And initially, I remember initially these meetings started in public. They were at Starbucks, and we would just meet and talk about these things. And then the conversations were getting a little bit deeper and more personal. and we moved him to his house because I was like, I don't really want to be like getting emotional or crying in like a public place. And so we moved these conversations to his house, and we would have these conversations about like, who do we really want to be? Like, what is our purpose? What are the things that we think we're good at that we aren't bringing to the world because we're afraid of what people might think about us?
Mm, yeah.
Right. And we would ask questions that we didn't exactly know the answers to right off the bat. And we would just kind of sit there. And it's like, it's kind of like when somebody asks you a question and you're like, ooh, that's kind of uncomfortable. Like, I wasn't ready
Mhm.
to fully answer that question. And you almost have like a spike of like anxiety, right? Or you have this spike of like, ooh, this is agitating me a little bit. And I used to think of like, I'm a visual learner. And so I used to think of like almost like an arc where like, what's the tipping point to where I start to get a little anxious when I'm asked a question that I might not want to answer. Right. And so those were the types of hard things you could say that we were asking ourselves. And we just got really vulnerable with each other and we got very authentic. And it was in a setting where there was nobody else there, right? So we trusted each other enough to kind of go to those spots, and it felt very freeing. Like it
Mm,
felt very almost like you released these mental weights or these entanglements in our minds that just made us feel a little bit better. And still to this day, I'm still doing that, right? That is
yeah.
ultimately the idea of mental fitness, is that we continue to keep going with these hard questions, right? If you think about physical fitness, I don't stop after 2 years, like, yep, I'm good, right?
Yeah.
Got
Yeah.
the six
There's
pack.
a right. Yeah. There's a
Yeah.
maintenance part of it, or
Yeah.
you want to go to new levels. And the reality is when it comes to your mental fitness, life is always going to throw challenges at you, because you're just going to go to, as soon as you like conquer one thing and you're like, I'm good, like something bigger is going to come that you have to figure out how to mentally like strengthen yourself, and how are you going to get through that.
Hmm.
I think that's amazing. I had a conversation. I went with a friend and we met for happy hour, and we were like, I was sharing some stuff with her. And in the middle of the conversation, it was really, really hard stuff. And this had to do with business. I literally stopped myself in the middle of the conversation. As hard as this was, what I was going through, I went, I'm actually enjoying this. And she like stopped and she like looked at me and she's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, because guess what? I'm getting experience and knowledge that you can't get otherwise.
Hmm.
So this is like a trip for me,
Yeah.
even though it's difficult. But what it does is it prepares you for even harder things. But I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Like, in my opinion, it's only preparing you to be able to go through harder things even better.
Hmm. Yeah. We have this saying that the waves of life are unpredictable, and they come at different times, at different speeds, at different shapes, sizes, colors, everything. And we look at this as mental preparation, essentially,
Yeah.
right? Like if you think of like almost like mental prevention, right? If you think of like training a physical muscle in a gym, right? And so let's say you're an athlete, right? You're physically training to prevent yourself from injury while also being able to perform, right? A
Yep.
physical injury. It's the same thing with mental fitness, right? I want to be able to mentally perform in life while also preventing myself from mental injury, right?
Yep.
Because when you lose your job or you break up with your significant other or something happens that you weren't ready to like attack, there's a lot of things that can happen, right? Because
Hmm.
there's so much uncertainty. And like in my life right now, I have a lot of uncertainty, and I'm actively using the stuff that I work with people on in my own life because I just know that it's going to help me get through these things that I just don't know exactly what the results are going to be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of us are like, we always desire to know like, well, what's the result going to
Mhm.
be? But if we knew the result before we went through the hard things
Mhm.
where the actual lessons are, then the result wouldn't be as sweet. What makes the result sweeter is having to go through the hard things. It's like someone that is born into wealth,
Mhm.
right? And like we've seen this before. Not that there's anything wrong with being born into wealth, but they've done these studies where, kids that are born into wealth
Mhm.
and have always have had a lot of money, the challenges that they face in life are quite different,
Mhm.
but the resilience in those kids are typically not as high
Mhm.
because they haven't had to go through the difficult times. I heard I'm sure you know who Barbara what's her last name, the famous retail investor on Shark Tank,
Oh,
Barbara.
I know I have the picture of her, but I
Yeah,
don't
you
know.
know what?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I can't remember I can't say the last name right
Mhm.
now. I have it, but I feel like it's wrong. But I watched a clip of hers one time, and she's like, she will every single day, she will 99.9% of the time choose a kid to do business with that did not grow up rich
Mhm.
versus a child that did. Now, that's not saying that rich kids aren't, born into a rich family,
Mhm.
that, they're not smart and they can't do great things. But what she was talking about was exactly that, the resilience and the appreciation, that sweetness of having to go through the hard times to create something and
Mhm.
then have that at the end.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and that's something that I've thought a lot about in my own life because I grew up in a great family, right? Like I
Hmm.
had a good mom and a good dad and a great sister, great friends, great teachers, coaches, mentors, and sometimes I'm like, was it too easy? Right?
Mm,
Like did I need more agitation to develop me more into a contributing member of society? And sometimes I get myself in these like thought patterns of like, what if it was harder? Like, would I have come out a different person? Um, Having said that, though, there were a lot of things that I did grow up with that were very like strict, right? And
hmm.
and so I think there is like some pros and cons to
Yeah.
really thinking about like the way that you did grow up. Like I shared this at the keynote that I gave a couple weeks ago that like my punishment was dictionary pages when I was little.
Yes.
Right. So, and like when I tell it to people, they're like, what does that even mean? Like what is that? And basically I would have to write dictionary pages if I did something that my father or mother didn't like. And it was a deliberate uh action to try and get me to change my behavior. Right.
Yep.
And if you grew up in a family that might not have been that present, right, or that hands-on, you might have just been, not changing your
Yeah.
behavior with things, right? So I think there are some, some ways that you can find, what were the good things that I really took
Yep.
from my childhood that have helped me in being a serving individual today.
Yeah, I'm curious how you would translate that, the dictionary punishment, how that translated over into a positive thing into your life now.
Well, I'll tell you what, when I was doing them, I didn't see any positivity in them.
No, I'm sure you didn't.
Oh goodness. It was really hard when I was doing them just because, imagine, right, it's a Friday night, middle of summer, your friends are playing down the road and I do something that, I wasn't supposed to do and I got to stay in for 3 to 4 hours and literally just copy pages of a dictionary while the sun's setting and my friends are playing. Like it was very painful for me mentally. Yet what it did for me, and I was actually just thinking about this a couple days ago, so I'm very so happy you asked this, Lizzie, was it made me sit with my own thoughts as a little
Hmm.
kid.
Yep.
And I think so often today, our own thoughts intimidate us and they,
Oh my gosh, you're so
right?
right.
And they
Yeah.
scare us, right? And I've had conversations with friends and they've actively said how much they look for communities or they make sure they're always around other people or make sure they're always with somebody because they don't like being alone because they don't want to go down these nasty negative rabbit
Hmm.
holes.
Yep.
um but what this punishment did was it took a little kid and it put him in his room and it made him, get really good penmanship, right, attention to
Yep.
detail, and it also made me think about the thing that I did to get me to this point, and in my head say, I don't want to do this again. So what is the new behavior? right?
Mhm.
What is the change that I have to make? And so I was constantly pivoting in my behaviors because when I was a little kid, I was a little bit of a pain in the rear end. And I think that actually helped me, right? Because it
Yeah.
forced me to find what was the more favorable types of ways to behave.
Yeah.
And it then led into my middle school days, my high school days, and college days because I learned what were these positive or these strong behaviors because I had such a pain of having to go through those dictionary pages
Mm.
that it ended up creating these really positive behaviors in my life. So it's been probably the single greatest uh, educator to me besides my parents or maybe a couple other moments of my life that I can actually even think of.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. And I want to dive into that just a little bit more because one thing that I want to touch on, because I think this is really in line with what we want to discuss today too, mental fitness, is that part of being alone and how a lot of people are scared of their own thoughts. We got to go to our first break here.
Mhm.
But when we come back, I want to dive into that a little bit because I think that that's something that we really need to touch on here today because you're so right. Lots of people are very afraid of their own thoughts too, like, and that is part of like getting to know you.
Yeah.
And if we can't do that, then we're scared of our own self. So
Mhm.
we're gonna go to our first break here, but when we come back, we'll dive right back into this. Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back.
We often get used to just feeling fine instead of reaching to feel excellent or even good. Wellness is about feeling good, and that is a journey of continually coming back to what is nourishing and healing for us. Your body is functional and ever changing, like a pendulum swinging. We must learn how to move with our bodies. Tuning into I'm Not Fine with functional nutrition coach Lizzie Enns will provide you with simple but effective tools that you can use right away so you can go from feeling just fine to feeling amazing. Listen for I'm Not Fine on Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and 12 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is I'm Not Fine with Lizzie Enns. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also send an email to Lizzie at undietyourself.live. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm having so much fun with this conversation here, and this was long overdue, so I'm so glad you're here, DJ. I want to talk a little bit about that. Why are we afraid of listening to our own thoughts? I discovered something a few years ago, and this is something that I did on my own. I didn't even know other people may or may not be doing this, but I was standing in front of a mirror, and at the moment in time, for the first time ever, I looked myself dead in the eyes and I blurred everything else out around me. I saw nothing but into my soul. That freaking scared me because I was
Mm.
like, I have never done this before. And I saw parts of me that I had never seen before. And that was the beginning of a self-discovery journey because I was like, exactly what you said. A lot of people bring noise and other people and community. Not that there's anything wrong with community. You want community, but it's always there. It's constant to block and avoid getting to know yourself. And I think that when we can get to a place of being comfortable being with ourselves and just getting to know us without having all the noise around us, that's where true healing starts to happen. However, like I went through a divorce last year, and that was like after 10 years of being married and then going through a divorce and all of a sudden like living on your own. You're like, wait a minute, I haven't been in this situation in a long time. How do I discover myself in a different way? And one of the things that my mentor told me just a few weeks ago, he goes, if you feel like you're lonely, he's like, what if it's not lonely and you flip that and you say it's discovery?
Mm.
And that flipped an entire switch in my brain where I was like, oh, it I get to discover myself more in this season. I'm
Mhm.
not lonely. I know I'm not lonely. I knew lonely wasn't even the right word, but I didn't know what to put in there. I was like, I don't know what it is. He's like, it's self-discovery. You get to discover yourself. And when we switch that from lonely to discovery, it changes the whole game. But I'm curious what you have experienced or you've seen people experience in these scenarios.
Mhm. So just last week, by the way, your mentor, that's a great like reframe. That is awesome. That helped me just as you kind of explained it. Um, just last week, I was working with a young man and he said he got involved with more community things similar to what we were just talking about, right? Because he
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to necessarily be alone with his own thoughts. And he said, I'm distracting myself. And when he said it in like a negative type of connotation. And I said, what's a better way to phrase that? And he said, I'm bettering myself. And kind of like similar to what you said, right? It isn't necessarily I'm lonely, it's I'm discovering myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the interesting thing here is if we are alone, we can actually go two ways, right? We can go in this area of it's like I'm alone, no one loves me, no one wants me, and that's where we can kind of get to these nasty thoughts. Or we can go into this other area where it's like I'm intentionally doing this to discover more about myself or better myself.
Yeah.
And I remember when I lived in New York, actually, right before I'd moved to Florida, I would go on these super long runs really early in the morning at like 5 a.m. I would go on like a 10-mile run.
Bless you.
10 miles, Leslie, and I intentionally didn't listen to any music. And I wanted
Mm.
to see where my thoughts went.
Yep.
And to be completely honest, they weren't all beautiful. They weren't all pretty and inspiring. And some of them would go to these places and I'm like, I wonder why it went there.
Mm.
Why did it actually go there? And I think if we really exercise our ability to stay curious with our own thoughts,
Yep.
we don't necessarily close a loop on, oh, that's why it was, right? If we always kind of keep this, or we actively try to, I know this is difficult, yet if we try to stay curious and be like, I wonder where that could have come from, right? I wonder why I could believe that. And I think what we end up doing is we end up going a little bit deeper. And when we go a little bit deeper, to your earlier point, we end up finding more of ourselves, right? And
Yeah.
we end up actually, I think, rediscovering really what we're capable of, right?
Yeah.
And what some of the things that we've experienced in our lives might have kind of covered up some of those thoughts or those behaviors with. So I think there is a lot of value in both community, right? As you mentioned, right? I think community is a huge piece. Yet I also think there is an equal value in being alone by yourself and being comfortable being alone by yourself,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? And working through that experience.
No, 100%. And I think that there's a difference between putting yourself in alone places where it's
Mhm.
like, are we doing this out of depression or are we doing it because we were just blocking everybody else out? Or are and because we don't trust anybody or we don't want anybody in our lives necessarily? I don't think anybody's ever in a place where they're like, they don't want anybody in their lives. But if you are going through a really hard time where you feel like you can't trust anybody, or maybe you are dealing with some anxiety and depression, it feels better to be alone, but that doesn't mean that alone time is intentional and healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can get to a place, especially I've seen this happen with people that go through, let's say, for example, really bad breakups.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much resentment and
Mhm.
anger towards the other person, that they block everybody else off and their heart becomes black
Yeah.
because they don't all of a sudden trust it. That's different because
Mhm.
now you've created what's an igloo around
Yeah.
yourself
Mhm.
where you're not allowing anything in. And one of the most beautiful things that I've discovered is just being open. Is like, if you have a new person that comes into your life, okay, every person that walks into your life, if you meet someone at the grocery store or at the park, what is that person walking into your life for?
Mhm.
And if you find yourself in a place of just pushing everybody away, where you're like, I'm not letting anybody in, that's not healthy either. So if you can get yourself to the place and say, okay, let me discover like, why is this person walking into my life now? What do they have that I can learn from? Or what do I have that I can offer for
Yeah.
them? Now you're in the discovery phase of things versus protection.
Yes. And what you're also doing in that intentional decision right there is you're kicking up your RAS, your reticular activating system. And so you're actively going to try and find why that person is in your life. Like, what's the
Mhm.
good reason this person's in my life? And you're going to find it. Right. And that's what I think is so powerful about, right, asking questions. And this kind of goes back to, right, active in like intentionally asking yourself difficult questions, right? Your brain's going to give you an answer. Right. So if
Yeah.
we can find positive answers as to why certain people come into our lives or why certain people go out of our lives,
Hmm.
right? It
Yep.
goes both ways. We can actively kind of complete those loops and find more answers in our lives.
And I think, just to your point, what you said about why people like go out of your life,
Mhm.
right? There's nothing wrong with that because
Mhm.
not everybody's supposed to go through your life with you through your life, your entire life.
Mhm.
And I think that sometimes that is something that we get hung up on, is like, why why do I feel like I need to break up with this person? But it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. But where you're at in your season in your life and where you need to go, they're actually not meant to walk with you
Mhm.
through that. And that's something that we have to be okay with.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's such an interesting it's such an interesting realization where it's like, is this person supposed to be in my life right now?
Hmm.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think there is a lot of honesty, right? And I think there's a lot of authenticity in actually asking yourself that question and trying to find an answer,
Yep.
right? Trying to actually get to a point where it's like, all right, I'm good with them not necessarily being in my life, or am I missing something?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where a lot of like the vulnerability kind of comes into play and really, you know, checking yourself, right? I think this is all about kind of like self-regulation really too.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I love that, actually. Checking yourself, like, so many times we're not. Like, how often do we go through, well, you probably don't do this really anymore because you're like mental resilient, but so many
Hey, I'm still working through all of this, Lizzie.
but so many people don't check in with themselves.
Hmm.
They don't ask the questions. There's no like mural like reflection of like, okay, why did this happen? Why did this person walk in? Why did I respond the way that I did? What is happening there? And if you're not checking in with yourself, I feel like at that point in time, life kind of controls you. You're
Hmm.
not controlling your situation, or you're not controlling your environment. And listen, it's not all about controlling everything in your life, because we're never going to control everything in our life. That's where the vulnerability comes in, and the openness of, hey, I'm open, but I'm also aware at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the vulnerability is such an interesting term to really
It is.
understand,
Yes.
right? And I always tell the story about, so when I played college football, I was a captain of the football team, and I spoke to the team before every game, 180 young men, and I took a lot of pride in doing this. Like I loved doing it. I was so grateful that I got the opportunity to speak to these young men before we went and played. And I got emotional every single freaking time, like every time. And I remember like the first couple times thinking to myself, like, Deej, you got to stop crying in front of 180 young men ready to play a college football game. Like, you got to stop doing this. And I couldn't mask my emotions just because I cared so much about these young men, right? I cared about them as not only my friends, but these are guys that I'm living with now, right? Like, we're really building a bond. And our last game, it was like my last talk, and I apologized to the team. And I basically said, guys, I understand there's a lot of you in here who probably do not want to see me crying in front of you guys before we go onto the football field. And I'm like, I'm sorry for that. And I explained, why I kind of got to that emotional state. And when I stopped, I would say, a third of the team kind of got up and they were like, don't you ever apologize for that. They said, that's the reason that we played as hard as we did. That's the reason that we were as successful as we were. Like, that's the reason why we're better men, right? We're better friends, was because we saw that you were willing to go there in front of us, like in a public kind of setting. And that showed us how strong you were and why we voted you the leader of this team, like the captain of this team. And I'd never thought of it like that.
Yeah,
And
because your heart was in it.
yeah,
Like, it mattered
right.
to you.
It mattered to me. And in those moments, right, and this is a huge kind of pivot that we try to highlight with clients, is in the moment of me being vulnerable, did I feel strong or weak? I felt weak. Yet how was I perceived? Right? I was perceived as strong, right? Right? I was perceived as strong, and it's a complete opposite feeling, right? An experience from the person doing it versus the person receiving it. Yet it's crucial to building trust and building rapport in whether it's a one-on-one relationship or whether it's like a team community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, guys, we got to go to our next break here. But when we come back, I want to dive into your business and what you are doing today, how you are helping clients, who you help. I know you mentioned businesses, but I'm pretty sure you do something with schools too. So I want to dive into that because people need to know what you are doing today. Guys, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
We often get used to just feeling fine instead of reaching to feel excellent or even good. Wellness is about feeling good, and that is a journey of continually coming back to what is nourishing and healing for us. Your body is functional and ever-changing, like a pendulum swinging. We must learn how to move with our bodies. Tuning into I'm Not Fine with functional nutrition coach Lizzie Enns will provide you with simple but effective tools that you can use right away, so you can go from feeling just fine to feeling amazing. Listen for I'm Not Fine on Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and 12 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is I'm Not Fine with Lizzie Enns. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Lizzie at undietyourself.live. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, everyone. All right, so I want to dive into your business. What is it that you are doing today, and how are you helping your clients?
So our main work that we do, we kind of have like two pieces to it. So the first piece is we partner with businesses and teams and organizations, and we help them improve their mental fitness or also their emotional intelligence. We
Mm.
have started to really realize that emotional intelligence is the greatest predictor of life success now. I've seen that stat like multiple times now in 2024 that it's past like IQ. Like EQ is now this really focused on skill. And we have now are basically helping people improve their emotional intelligence. And so we will partner with a whole business and we'll say, hey, we'll work with all of your employees and help them improve their emotional intelligence. So one, they can do hard things in their work life better because we know there's going to be some stressful things. And then two, it also translates into their personal lives as well.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a two-prong approach. And so what we've seen is a lot of the businesses that we've worked with, people get more out of this from a personal standpoint
Wow.
because I think more of our lives is, I think we forget that we're human beings who happen to be employees or bosses, right? CEOs, right? And so what we've realized is what we're really doing is we're helping the human improve first, and then that's filtering into every other area of their life. And so
Wow.
that is kind of the professional side, the B2B side that we help. And then me personally, I don't know how much I've talked to you about this, Lizzie, but it's in the last couple of weeks, it started to rise a little bit more. I started working with young men when I was 24. And so basically what happened was when I went from like 21 to 24, that 3-year span of like actively training my mind like a muscle on like a weekly basis and daily basis, I got to this point where I had some parents actually ask, hey, can you teach my son how to do what you did? Right. And how to basically manage some of the stress that young men face today, right? Whether they're societal expectations, whether it's managing social media, right? Lots of challenges there. And so I started working with these young men. And over time, I realized I was like, there's a big problem here, right? With the way
Mhm.
that right? With the way that how I think young men manage stress and manage challenge. And so I initially was just working with a couple of young men over the last couple of years, and it started to increase, right? Parents are starting to say, hey, could you help my son with this? And so that is kind of like my other piece to Acres of Diamonds is we help I like to say we help young men in their 20s stop being confused men in their 20s,
Oh, wow.
right? Because I was one of those confused men. And I realized through mentorship and coaching and this idea of mental fitness, that's ultimately what helped me. So those are kind of the two areas that I'm mainly focusing on right now. And the other area that I'm in kind of like a discovery phase is this CrossFit mental fitness idea. So
Mm.
I have this, I have this really interesting idea in my head of like functional fitness for your mind.
Yep.
And because CrossFit is functional fitness for your body, right? For life. And so right now I'm in this kind of market research phase, you could say, of this possible CrossFit program. And I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about the whole CrossFit community as of a whole, and what are the pain points that we can help people solve when it comes to improving their mental fitness, specifically for a CrossFit type of person.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you personally do CrossFit?
I do CrossFit,
You
and
do do CrossFit?
it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never like gotten into CrossFit.
Mhm.
I've been to a couple gyms with it, but it wasn't necessarily like for me.
Mhm.
But the reason I was asking is because I know it can be very competitive,
Mhm.
and I used to go to this chiropractor years ago, and he used to treat a lot of CrossFit people, and he's
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, CrossFit keeps me in business. And I was like, oh my God, what are you talking about? So he kind of like explained it to me, and I'm like, well, there's smart ways to do it, and then there's not smart ways to do it, and I know that you know that.
Yeah.
um but I think that the fact that you're already in there,
Mhm.
one of the things that he taught me at that point in time is like when you do it wrong, it like kills your nervous system.
Mhm.
And that's why people get injured, is because they're not allowing the rest that they need, or maybe not fueling their body with enough of the proper food that they need to like get their body to heal. And
Mhm.
so the synapses of the nerves and the brain to the body, that was getting shot, and that's why people would get injured. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, totally 100% makes sense.
Mhm.
I come from a training background. And
Mhm.
so I think that with you and this idea that you have with functional fitness for the mind and the brain, totally,
Yeah.
100%. I can totally see that be a thing. But I want to dive into also with the young kids that you
Mhm.
help. I think that is absolutely amazing. And one of the things that you pointed out was like emotional intelligence. Can
Mhm.
you dive into that just a little bit more? Like, what have you found and what have you guys discovered in your business with emotional intelligence? What do people do to
Mhm.
start in that area?
So that's actually, I think, one of the larger problems is that we don't necessarily know how to like improve your emotional intelligence, right? Like if I went on Google and was like, how do I improve my emotional intelligence? There might be like some exercise you can do and this and that, right? Like practice mindfulness, meditate. And if
Mhm.
I'm like just coming into this, I'm like, what the hell does all this mean? Right? I don't
Yeah.
know exactly
Yeah.
what that means. And so the idea behind emotional intelligence, because I like to think of things as like, if I was to explain this to a third grader, how would I do it? And it was basically, how well do I understand my emotions and how well can I understand what other people could be feeling as well?
Mhm.
Because then I can ultimately change the way that I operate to help lead myself more or lead that individual on a and better suited for them. Right. And so if I can understand these emotions just a little bit better, do I think that I will have more success in my life? Well, when it comes to human beings, we are emotional beings that think. We are not thinking beings that have emotions. So if I can understand these emotions, maybe I can have a little bit more success in my life. And
Yeah.
so a lot of these young men, you know, it's I was actually just like creating some copy for this a couple days ago, and I said it's difficult now because the majority of young men grew up with a smartphone in their hands instead of a hammer in their hands,
Oh,
right?
so good. Yep.
Right. So if you think about that, like, what's the problems with that? Well, let's think about how accessible it is for a 16 or 17-year-old young man. And I just say young man because I am a young man, right? There are young women who are experiencing this as well, right?
Mhm.
I can go on these apps and see everything I'm not, right? I can
Yep.
see all of these highlight reels and I could say, wait, should I be doing this? Oh my gosh, look at how many
Mhm.
followers they have, right? And this and that. And so here's where, right, social media is ultimately this breeding ground of fear if you aren't emotionally intelligent enough to handle it, right? So
Yep.
I always like to precursor it with saying, you know, I don't think social media is a bad thing. I think it's the way that we just tend to use social media,
Yeah.
right? Social media can be great, right? If we use it for you know, spreading good news, right? Spreading stories, right? Charities, right? Yet there's also a ton of comparison, right? There's also a ton
Oh
of
my
judgment,
gosh.
right?
Yep.
So,
There's the comparison, and then there is well, I have pretty large audiences, so I, have a lot of attacked stuff that happens
mhm.
as well. It's interesting because when you were talking about emotional intelligence, and one of the things that I discovered over just in the last few days because of what has been happening is if you're only data fed, it makes you data fat.
All
What
right,
that means,
say that again.
data
Data fat.
fat makes you data fat. That doesn't mean that you're emotionally intelligent. It just means you know stuff, but it
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's the right stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's the right things that you need to be knowing. So, uh the other thing that I tell people is like a lot of people are over informed on the wrong things and under informed on the right things
Mm, I love that, Lizzie. That's great. I
because of social media. We're
mhm,
consuming way too much stuff, and if you're not emotionally intelligent to go, wait a minute, that's just a snippet of
mhm,
what is actually the entire story. And so it's always still astonishing to me today what people will say and do on social media.
mhm,
And you have to be 100% emotional intelligent to
mhm,
decipher, like, what do you let in
mhm.
and what do you block out? Like I have to block people all the time because I get to decide what comes into my platform.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the strangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's my duty to protect my community, but it's also my duty to protect the energy that's coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that people have to understand. But if you do that, then there are going to be people that are like, well, she just blocks everybody and she doesn't want to hear anybody. Well, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter because that's my job to protect, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, we have to go to our last break here. I feel like we could talk for another entire hour on
Yes.
this. This is fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because what you said about emotional intelligence, I was like, oh my gosh, that like how do we help people with that? And I don't think you get emotionally intelligent by having a smartphone in your hand necessarily.
Mhm. I agree.
Too long.
Yes.
Too I'm
It's
like, can we put some people on the farms for a bit?
I love that idea, Lizzie. Go find a weight room, go read a book. Oh my goodness, I love
So
it.
I'm like, I'm gonna create a farm, an Amish farm that has no electricity. It becomes this like tourist thing where
Mhm.
it's like you have to go there for an entire week and live exactly the way that the Amish live. You have no electronics, nothing.
Lizzie,
I
that's a
think.
phenomenal idea. I would invest in that right now.
Oh, boot camp coming up. Amish boot camp coming up. Anyway, let's go to our last break here when we come back. I want you to think about 3 things that people can start doing right away. Just simple things.
Mhm.
What can they start on their day-to-day life that is going to help them in
Mhm.
this area? So guys, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
We often get used to just feeling fine instead of reaching to feel excellent or even good. Wellness is about feeling good, and that is a journey of continually coming back to what is nourishing and healing for us. Your body is functional and ever-changing, like a pendulum swinging. We must learn how to move with our bodies. Tuning into I'm Not Fine with functional nutrition coach Lizzie Enns will provide you with simple but effective tools that you can use right away, so you can go from feeling just fine to feeling amazing. Listen for I'm Not Fine on Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and 12 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is I'm Not Fine with Lizzie Enns. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Lizzie at undietyourself.live. Now, back to the program.
All right, welcome back, you guys. We are at the end of the show here. I'm so sad. This was so fun. Such a fun conversation too. I feel like a couple geeks just geeking out over like how can we better our brains. Are you familiar with Doc Amen? His work?
Doc Amen. Is he bald?
Yes.
Yes, I have seen him before. Yes. I remember listening to a podcast with him and Tom Bilyeu, I believe, on impact theory.
Don't think I've seen that. He does
Oh.
he has the Amen clinics and does a lot of
Okay.
like the brain scans and stuff. He
Mhm.
works with celebrities and stuff. So Melissa Hergert,
Yes.
her clinics are similar to what Amen's clinics are. But I would probably go to her clinic because she does her work just a little bit differently, but they're
Mhm.
Amen certified, I believe. First, where can people find you?
So people can go to our website. So our website is youracresofdiamonds.com. So our business is called Acres of Diamonds. You could also probably just go on Google and type in DJ Logory Acres of Diamonds. If you want to find more about me and kind of the things that I'm putting out into the world from like a content perspective, I'm trying to be very creative with all of those things. You can just follow me on Instagram is at DJ Logory. And that'll also lead you to Acres of Diamonds as well.
Perfect. We'll have that in the show notes as well. So give us what are like 3 things that people can start with today if they want to become smarter with their brain?
So when you asked me this prior to the break, I wrote down 5.
Perfect.
So I had like the general 3 that I always recommend people just kind of evaluate a little bit in their lives, which is eat, move, and sleep. So the
Mm,
first thing, be honest with your diet, right? I remember when I initially got into this stuff, I remember eating like Chex Mix and telling myself like, yeah, that's healthy. When it's like, no, it's not, right?
no.
And so I think the first thing you can do to, whether it's, just feeling better, I personally believe those three things kind of make up anywhere from 80 to 90% of my own personal
Mhm.
mental health. Um, First is eat, right? Understand the type of food that you're eating, right? And be conscious of it. And don't always subside to the workplace, hey, we brought in donuts and pizza and you have to eat it.
Yep,
Right?
exactly.
That's right. Like, be the person who says, no, I'm taking myself a little bit more serious than that. Right. And,
Yep.
and, and my diet is something that's very important to me. So I would say the first is eat. Second is move. And when I say move, it's movement of both your body and your mind. So what are you doing each day physically that is going to get the heart rate up, right? Get you sweating a little bit and, kicking in those endorphins. And then what is the counter equivalent to that you're doing for your mind, right? Whether you're reading, whether you're meeting with a mentor, whether you are investing in some courses, right? Whether you're part of a mastermind group, right? What are you doing every day that's going to very consciously make your mind stronger too?
Hmm.
So
Yep.
eat, move, and then the last is sleep. And this is something that this is the hardest one actually, personally for me, just because sleep is something where you're like, hey, I can get 5 hours of sleep and still operate and I'll be fine.
Mm.
Yet the difference is night and day personally for me. I try to get anywhere from 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. I wake up at 5 a.m. So I'm in bed by 9. And you mentioned that earlier.
You're not normal, DJ.
I'm trying to not be normal. Normal's boring. Um,
Exactly. I can agree with that.
Yeah, so I would say sleep as well is a huge thing that's helped me feel a lot better, operate a lot better on a daily basis. And then the two kind of bonus ones that I was thinking of during the break in is the first one is fear. Ask yourself what you're really afraid of. And
Mm,
and don't and you don't need to publicly state this. You don't need to state this to a friend, right? Write this in like a journal that only you have, right? Or type it up in a document that only you see. I've asked myself this a lot, and these are things that are stemming from whether they're insecurities, whether they're limiting beliefs, whether they're flaws that I have that I'm trying to work through, or whether these are blind spots that coaches have helped me see within my life. Um, it's a hard question, right? And that is the idea of training your mind like a muscle. So I would address that. And then the next thing I would recommend is you ask yourself a question: if you really knew me, blank, right? Like,
wow.
if you really knew me, what would you say? Right? If
If I really knew me or if another person really knew me,
like if I was talking to somebody and they were like, tell me about yourself, and I was like, if you really knew me, what would you say?
what would you say?
Right.
Wow.
And that, I think, really taps into that vulnerability, right? Because I think we try to hide a lot of the things that we might not be that happy about. And that's part of the human experience, right? That
Yeah.
is the uncertainty, right? That is the working through all of these challenges, right? So, you know, ask yourself, if somebody was to, if you were actually conveying to somebody, if you really knew me, what would that answer be?
I love that so much. I've never heard someone say that before. That's a really, really good one. Because the other question is, do you really know?
Mm,
So, if you ask someone, I've had this practice with my clients and myself too, is like, who are you? And this is nothing to do with your job, your title,
mm,
being a spouse or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a mom or a parent or whatever it is, your work. Who are you outside of the titles? Most
mhm.
people can't answer that because they don't know. But if you go on discovery with it, amazing. DJ, we are at the end of the show here. This was absolutely phenomenal. I can't wait for you guys. I want to thank you again for coming on here. It was my pleasure having you on here. I appreciate you. And thank you for being my friend too.
Well, Lizzie, thank you so much for allowing me to be your friend. And thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. Bye, guys. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the I'm Not Fine show. Lizzie Ends returns Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Mountain Time, and 10 a.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Until then, have the best week of your life by making choices that take you from feeling fine to feeling amazing.